When her husband, the Alpha King, told her to leave the palace, he called it time to rest, but she knew what it was: exile. The king was sending his queen away because in 5 years of marriage, she had yet to give him an heir. That's what the court murmured, at least, pointing as the Barren queen was escorted into a carriage, not knowing when or if she would ever be allowed back. She was being sent to a foreign estate. Good for her health, the king's attendant had said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But after days of travel down roads that went from stone to dirt, through thick forest, what she ended up with was not an estate. It was a mockery: crumbled walls, holes in the ceiling big enough to see the sky, vegetation tearing the place apart. Her new home was not a home. It was a ruin, a place for her to disappear and never be heard from again. The guard shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Her lady-in-waiting stepped out of the carriage and made a sound like a wounded animal. But Pandra, staring at the crumbling estate, took in the sharp, brutal contrast with her past life and smiled. Chapter 1. The manor looked like something that had died and been left to rot. Pandra stood in the remains of the courtyard and took it all in. Crumbled walls held together by stubbornness and ivy, a roof that was more holes than tiles. The whole structure leaned back as if the forest beyond was slowly swallowing it whole. It was the ugliest thing she had ever seen. Behind her, Susan's voice. "This is no place for royalty. There must be some mistake." Pandra emitted an unladylike snort. This was no mistake. This was her husband, Godric, saying, "This is what you get for failing me." Pandra was the Alpha King's third queen. The first had died with the baby in childbirth. The second had vanished mysteriously after 8 years of failed pregnancies. Both had been shifters, like the king, strong, powerful. Pandra was human. An attempt at something different is what they'd said at the wedding. "Susan," she turned, "leave the poor man alone. He has a long journey back." She waved the guard away dismissively. "You may go, Your Majesty." Susan squealed shrilly. "You cannot possibly suggest we stay here." "It is unbecoming of a queen." The entrance hall was a disaster. Rotting floorboards bent under their weight. Mold crept up the walls. "There are rats," Susan whined. "Probably." Pandra agreed. "It's already bad enough being banished from court." Susan continued, but this Pandra held up a hand. "Susan, do you hear that?" Susan stopped mid-breath. "I know what. That's the sound of freedom," Pandra exclaimed. "No gossiping courtiers, no side-eyeing mistresses, and most importantly, she grasped Susan by her shoulders. No matrimonial duty. 5 years of performing in the dark. 5 years of lying still and quiet while Godric tried to get an heir out of her like she was a broodmare. 5 years of feeling like a failure every single month. "I don't even have to pretend to care about what he has to say," Pandra said, overjoyed. "Or wear corsets for him. That's all good and well." Susan grunted. "But what will we do when winter strikes? What about food?" Pandra softened her voice. "We'll figure it out. What matters is that no one's telling us what to do. This place is ours." They explored what was left of the manor. The west wing had partially collapsed. The grand staircase was rotted through, half the steps missing entirely. Water had pooled into the kitchens, turning the floor into a marsh of broken pottery and rusted metal. Finally, on the east side, they found a smaller room. 4 walls that felt solid enough, a ceiling with only one small hole in the corner, a fireplace that was intact. "This will work," Pandra said, hope flaring. Susan surveyed it with despair. "My lady, this is a servant's room." "And I," Pandra said cheerfully, "am currently a servant to no one." Perfect fit. They set to work. Susan found a half-rotted broom and swept out the worst of the debris, while Pandra gathered armfuls of straw from what used to be a stable. The straw was dusty and smelled like animals and old rain. At court, she would have been mortified. Here, she felt invigorated. The window was a tougher conundrum. They needed something to block the wind. They used a rock as a hammer and some rusty nails to pin Susan's cloak over it. Susan drove the nails in with surprising efficiency. "Your late husband taught you this?" Pandra asked, holding the corner steady. "He used to let me help him with small projects," Susan said, showing her latent grief. "Said I had good hands." Susan's late husband had been a carpenter. She knew her way around flint and tinder. Pandra watched, fascinated, as Susan coaxed sparks into kindling. Time she learned how to do that, too, Pandra thought. That night, Pandra lay on the floor with her cloak bunched under her head. No silk sheets, swan feather pillows, only rock-hard floor, whistling wind, and the cold. And yet, she couldn't stop smiling. She hadn't known what freedom felt like until today. Really, if it wasn't for that strange moaning, everything would have been perfect. Pandra's eyes snapped open. Wait, moaning? She held her breath, listening. The house creaked and groaned. An owl hooted somewhere outside. The wind wheezed through the broken windows. Then a moan, low and pained. Pandra's heart kicked hard against her ribs. What was that? She turned her head slowly towards Susan, who was snoring softly beside her. Pandra tried to calm her racing pulse. Her hands shook as she lit their salvaged candle with the dying embers of the fire. The flame cast flickering shadows across the walls. The idea of running away was quickly squashed beneath her resolve. This was her house, and she would be damned if she went crawling back to the palace. Pandra took a deep breath and opened the door. The hinges screamed, and she froze. Certain Susan would wake. Nothing. The woman could sleep through an earthquake. Pandra stepped into the corridor, candle held high. This is exactly how people die in stories. The darkness was all-consuming. The candlelight barely reached the walls. Doors hung open on either side like hungry mouths. The floorboards creaked under her weight. She walked slowly, following the invisible trail of the moan. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, but she kept walking. Another moan, closer now, definitely coming from deeper in the house. Pandra's pulse hammered in her throat. She held the candle higher. "Hello?" she called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. She took another step forward. Then another. "My lady!" Pandra jumped, nearly dropping the candle. She spun around. Susan stood in the doorway, eyes bleary with sleep. "Is something the matter?" she asked. Pandra opened her mouth to answer, stopped, listened. Nothing, just the wind in the walls. Had she imagined it? She stepped further into the corridor, holding the candle higher. Looked around. Nothing, just shadows and broken doors. Chapter 2. My lady, get down from there. The following day, Pondra's feet teetered precariously on the creaking wooden beam. "You'll break your neck." Susan's voice had reached a worrying pitch. "What will I tell His Majesty? Tell him I died happy far away from him." Pandra stuffed a handful of thatch into a gap, determined to cover the worst before the next rain. "You already do the hunting. You have to let me do something." It was true. As a shifter, a swift and cunning fox, Susan was infinitely better at catching food than Pandra, whose one attempt at using a bow at court had resulted in her near murder of a servant. "You can collect berries," Susan shouted up. "What, am I 5?" Pandra was frustrated that just because she couldn't shift into something with claws and teeth and supernatural strength, she was treated as if she were weaker. Weaker didn't mean incapable. "I'm coming, my lady." Pandra could hear Susan cursing as she found footholds in the crumbling wall, which is when Pandra's foot slipped. For one heart-stopping second, she felt herself falling, arms windmilling, the ground rushing up to meet her. Her hand snagged the beam. She hung there, gasping. "I'm fine," she shouted. Susan appeared over the edge of the roof, face pale. "You are absolutely not fine." She grabbed Pandra's arm and hauled her up onto a more stable section of the roof. "The king should be ashamed of himself," Susan muttered, helping Pandra down carefully. "Putting you in such danger. The king doesn't value a woman who can't bear him children." Pandra cut in. Susan stared at her. "My lady, how can you say that? You're the queen. I'm the third queen." "Nothing that special." Pandra shrugged. "My uncle got a fat dowry. The king got a wife to parade around until she failed him, too. And I got a gilded cage." Pandra smiled wearily. "Come on, let's figure out what else needs fixing." Susan left to hunt in the late afternoon, shifting into her fox form and disappearing into the trees with a flick of rust-colored tail. Pandra went berry hunting like she was 5. But it wasn't like she could do much else. She found some mushrooms, the kind she recognized from the palace kitchens. She gathered them in her skirt, feeling ridiculously proud of herself. By the time Susan returned, Pandra had a small pile of mushrooms and some wild onions she'd found near the well. Susan had a rabbit already cleaned. "Not bad for the first day," Pandra said. "We make a decent team, my lady." They cooked it over the fire, primitive, smoky, probably ruining the meat in 6 different ways, but it tasted amazing. Pandra ate with her fingers, grease running down her chin, and didn't care even a little bit. They were finishing up when the moan came. Low, pained, unmistakable. Susan's head snapped up. What was that? Pandra was already on her feet, heart racing. "You heard it?" Susan stood, eyes darting toward the door. "It doesn't sound like an animal." "No," Pandra agreed. Another moan, louder this time. Closer, it came from above. Pandra said, "Above the kitchens, maybe?" They grabbed a candle each and tiptoed down the dark hallways, following the sound. The stairs to the upper floor were treacherous, half-rotted, groaning under their weight. Pandra climbed carefully, testing each step. The room above the kitchens was empty, dust thick on the floor. No footprints except theirs, but they could still hear it, the moaning, closer now. From the wall, Susan made a noise of pure distress. "My lady, if someone is hiding in the walls, they probably don't want to be found." "Then they shouldn't moan so loudly," Pandra replied. She pressed her hands against the wall, exploring the paneling. My lady, please. Can we not retire to our chambers, board up more securely, and explore tomorrow? Pandra turned to face her, candle held between them. Perhaps you're right, safety first. They spent the rest of the evening boarding up windows and reinforcing the door to their room. That night, Susan fell asleep quickly, exhausted. But Pandra lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. When the noise came again, it wasn't a moan. Something was moving. Pandra lit a candle from the fire and stood and returned to the floor above the kitchen. The sound was coming from the same wall. She moved closer, pressing her ear against the stone. She could hear breathing, slow and labored, right there on the other side. Her hands moved along the wall, searching. There had to be a way in, a door, something. Her fingers found it, a gap in the paneling, barely visible in the candlelight. She pressed, and the panel shifted. Pandra's breath caught. A secret door. She pushed the panel open wider and stepped onto an upward spiraling stairway. She thought of Susan, still snoring soundly. She should absolutely not investigate a hidden passage in the dark alone. She held the candle high and started climbing. At the top, the stairs opened into a small room hidden between floors. A loud groan at her feet. Pandra gasped, looked down, and a man lay on the floor at her feet, half veiled in shadow. Pandra stifled a scream, his clothes torn and stained dark with something that looked horribly like blood. His eyes were open, but unfocused, glassy with fever. Pandra took a careful step forward. The man was in his mid-40s, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His breathing was shallow and rapid, definitely sick. She reached out tentatively, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead. Burning. He was running a fever hot enough to kill, and black veins were visible beneath the skin of his neck. Pandra frowned. She hesitated, then tugged his collar aside with trembling fingers. The black veins spread across his chest in twisted patterns. "What is that?" she whispered to the empty room. The man shivered violently, a soft, wounded sound escaping his throat. Pandra stood quickly. He might be a squatter in her home, but he was dying. She couldn't let that happen. Susan would know what to do. She ran back down the hidden stairs, feet flying over stone, candlelight bouncing wildly off the narrow walls. She burst into the bedroom, breathless and wild-eyed. "Susan, there's someone upstairs, a man. He's—" The words died in her throat. A tall, broad-shouldered stranger stood behind Susan in the center of the room, one hand clamped firmly over her mouth as she thrashed against him. And there were others. A woman, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair, and the kind of steady hands that spoke of a healer. A girl, early 20s at most, leaning against the far wall, with a knife held loosely in one hand. Pandra barely had time to register the spike of fear before she was yanked backward off her feet, pressed against a broad chest. The candle fell from her hands, dying on the stone floor, and plunging the room into deeper shadow lit only by the dying fire. "Where is he?" The voice was low in her ear, rough with controlled urgency, like someone who knew exactly how much force to use and wasn't using it yet. Chapter 3. Pandra didn't think. She drove her elbow back hard into her attacker's stomach, aiming for the soft spot below the ribs. His grip loosened, barely, just enough for her to feel a flicker of satisfaction. "Not a bad hit," the man said against her ear. He held her effortlessly, Shifter, she thought. The strength gave it away. I asked you about our friend, he continued, breath warm against her ear. Go fish, Pandra snapped. After 5 years as the Alpha King's wife, little could scare her. Her captor twisted her around firmly until they stood face to face. He was tall. Pandra had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Sharp cheekbones, a noble-bearing type of handsome, tempered by the outdoors and eyes pale green and intelligent. He inhaled deeply, scenting her the way shifters did. We know he's in one of the secret passages, he said. He must have crawled in when he heard intruders, but which one? Pandra held his gaze. If I show you, will you get out of here? He smiled. The sooner we find our friend, the sooner we leave. Susan's gaze met hers from across the room, communicating don't trust them. But what choice did they have? Fight? Against 5 armed shifters while there might be more coming? Don't hurt Susan, Pandra said, ignoring her friend's silent protests. You have my word. The man's voice sounded sincere. Like that meant anything from a stranger who'd broken into her house and taken them captive. But what choice did they have? Come on then, she said. She led them all upstairs to the wall with the panel. Pandra pressed the mechanism, revealing the narrow passage beyond with a soft click. They reached the top, and Pandra stepped aside into the small hidden room, pressing herself against the wall to make space. Kalner! The older woman pushed past Pandra. Her hands went to the sick man's face, checking for pulse and fever and life. He's burning up, she said, voice tight. Nolric, we need to give it to him right now. Pandra went still. Nolric, she knew that name, but it couldn't be. The alpha of the rogue pack terrorizing the countryside. Nolric, who'd been stealing from royal shipments and freeing prisoners from work camps. Nolric, who her husband wanted caught and executed more than anything. Standing 3 feet away, Pandra watched the man who held her move toward Kalner. Watched the way the others deferred to him with small shifts of posture. Definitely the alpha. He fished a small vial filled with dark, viscous liquid from his pocket. What is that? Pandra asked, affronted. Poison? Nolric glanced at Pandra with amusement. What's it to you? She bristled at his tone. I'm not letting you hurt an innocent man in my house, she snapped. And how do you even know he's innocent? Nolric tilted his head, studying her with those sharp green eyes. He could be a murderer for all you know. Pandra crossed her arms, refusing to back down. Is he? Nolric smiled, brief and genuine. No. He held up the vial, letting candlelight catch the dark liquid inside. And it's not poison. This man's been poisoned already. This is the antidote. Pandra blinked, processing. Poison, antidote. 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. She'd been passing her husband's study when she'd overheard voices discussing the rogue problem. The king and the palace alchemist. The poison is revolutionary, the alchemist had said. It targets the shifter metabolism specifically. Excruciatingly painful and nearly impossible to cure without the exact antidote. Her husband had laughed, like the idea of slow, painful death was delightful, looking at the black veins spreading across Kalnor's skin, like cracks in porcelain, at his fever-bright face, slick with sweat, twisted guilt in her stomach. Fine, she said. Nolric uncorked the vial with his teeth and placed it to Kalnor's lips. Come on, Kal, he murmured, voice soft in a way Pandra hadn't expected. Drink. You're not dying in some stranger's wall. That would make a terrible story. For a horrible moment, Pandra thought they were too late. Then his throat worked, swallowing reflexively. When the vial was empty and Kalnar was breathing more steadily, Nolrik stood, wiping his hands on his pants. I guess we'll be off. Don't move him. Pandra's words burst out. 5 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. Nolrik raised his eyebrows. Excuse me? Pandra's mind raced back to that overheard conversation. The alchemist had been very specific. If anyone is poisoned, and you wish to save them, Your Majesty, administer the antidote immediately. But do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not move them for at least a week. 2 weeks if the poison has significantly progressed. The antidote needs time to circulate to the heart properly. Any movement will disrupt the process, and the patient will die anyway, just slower. Pandra took a breath. It won't work if you move him, she explained. He needs to stay still. Pandra paused, thinking back to the alchemist's exact words. The marks need to be all gone first. She pointed at Kalnar's neck, at the root-like black veins under his skin. How do you know that? Nolrik's voice was charged with suspicion, and Pandra felt a thrill of danger. These were shifters being hunted by her husband. Telling them she was the king's wife would not go well. She tried to sound casual. I've seen this poison before. Nolrik watched her for a long moment, then he shrugged. Well, can't argue with that. Of course we can argue with that, Aster rounded on him. It's not safe here. Safer than moving him to however long it takes to get to your camp, Pandra interjected. Aster whirled on her, eyes flashing gold. You don't know anything. Pandra raised an eyebrow. I know that's just good sense. Nolrik threw up his hands in mock surrender. All right, since the lady so graciously offers, we will stay here. Pandra blinked. Wait a minute, she started. Thank you for your hospitality, my lady. Nolrik bowed mockingly, a perfectly executed bow. For that moment, he looked like someone who should be parading through palace halls in silk and velvet, instead of standing here in dirty, torn clothes. Dre, he pointed at Susan's broad-shouldered captor. Escort the lady and her companion to a secure room. Both she and Susan ended up in a back room with boarded-up windows. Pandra wanted to kick the door until her toes broke. Instead, she just stood there, shaking slightly, mind racing. Chapter 4. 2 days locked in this room, and Pandra was losing her mind. You need to sit down, my lady, Susan said. Wearing a hole in the floor won't get us out of here. I can't. Pandra turned and paced back. I can't just sit here doing nothing while they take over my house. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She was being locked in, again. It was too familiar, too close to the 5 years she'd just escaped. Her husband had never locked her in rooms, but he'd controlled her, made her feel like a thing he owned rather than a person he'd married. And now, just when she'd finally tasted freedom, it was being taken away again. We should just wait it out, Susan said gently. No. Pandra spun to face her. We need to prove that we're worth keeping alive. She moved to the window. Think about it, Susan, she said quietly. If I'd proven useful to His Majesty, he wouldn't have sent me here. My lady. Susan's voice was strange. Pandra turned. I don't regret it. I'm glad I've been sent away. Susan grimaced. No, my lady, she whispered. I was going to say, most of these rogues are shifters, and shifters have excellent hearing. Pondra's stomach dropped. You're right. We have to be careful. Susan squeezed her hand just as footsteps approached in the hallway, making them both tense. The lock clicked. The door swung open. It was the sandy-haired rogue from before, the young one who'd kept apologizing while restraining Susan. How's the patient? Pondra asked. Fine. The rogue shrugged. He was clearly lying. Susan is good with herbs, Pondra said, and I've seen this poison at work before. If you take us to him, we can help. The rogue said nothing, but something in his eyes turned considering. After a long moment, he turned and left. I guess that's a no. Susan sighed. It's a he can't decide for himself, Pondra said. He'll be checking in with his alpha. So now we wait. Night had fallen when they finally heard footsteps again, heavier, more confident. May I come in? Nolric's voice came through the door. Does it matter? Pondra called back. When you've taken over my house? Nolric stepped inside looking tired. How did this even come to be your house? He asked. It's been in shambles for years. Long story, Pondra said, and I don't think you have time. Nolric opened his mouth like he wanted to protest, then closed it again because she was right. Apparently you're good with herbs, he said. Susan is, Pondra replied. I can help her and monitor your patient's condition. Nolric looked at Pondra for a long moment, eyes sharp despite the fatigue and very green in the candlelight. Fine, he said. Aster will stay with you. As they walked through the manor, Pondra's eyes were everywhere. People moved through the halls with purpose. A woman carrying water, 2 men sharpening weapons. More approached Nolric as they walked, asking questions in low voices. How many of you are there? Pondra asked. Nolric glanced at her. Don't concern yourself with that, my lady. It's my home, Pondra said. You do seem unusually fond of this ruin, Nolric observed. Well, I don't see you preferring the woods to it, Pondra snapped. Nolric nodded, conceding the point. There, he joked. I too prefer this hole-filled roof, and the rats over the damp, moss and poison ivy-filled woods. Something hot flared in Pondra's chest. Well, sir, she crossed her arms. From where I stand, it looks like entitlement, plenty. Gratitude, 0. Nolric stared at her for a beat. You're right, he said. I'm grateful for your hospitality, which you wouldn't have shown us if we'd asked. They arrived at the small hidden room where Calnor lay. Aster sat beside him, looking pale and exhausted. What are they doing here? She demanded when they entered, hostility palpable. Nolric moved to stand beside her. Hopefully relieving you a bit. You look like you need rest. I'm fine, Aster snapped automatically. Nolric crouched down to her level. You're exhausted, kid. Go lie down. His hand touched Aster's shoulder, just briefly. And yet her eyes widened immediately. Pondra watched the flush spread across her cheeks, visible even in the dim candlelight. The girl definitely had a crush on her leader, and Nolric had no idea. Susan moved immediately to Calnor's side, professional and focused. His fever is still running high. And yet you haven't been giving him water? She gestured at his dry, cracked lips. He needs to stay hydrated. Nolric nodded. I'll have someone bring you water more regularly. What else? Susan launched into a list. Practical, efficient, cool cloths for the fever. The herbs she'd requested, made into tea if possible. They got to work. Getting the fever down was actual work. At one point, Pandra felt her stomach turn. "You all right, my lady?" Susan asked. "Fine," Pandra managed. "Just the smell." Susan glanced at her then. "Might be pregnant, my lady. I remember my sister hated this smell when she was with child." The words hung in the air between them until Pandra laughed, sharp and dismissive. They went back to work. But in the back of Pandra's mind, a small seed of awareness had been planted. Late. My courses are late. Chapter 5. 10 days passed. 10 days of Susan fussing over Calner like a mother hen whilst he grumbled that he was fine. "You need to drink more water," Susan would say. "I'm not a plant, woman. I don't need watering every hour." It went on and on like this until all Pandra could do was escape with any flimsy old excuse. That morning, she escaped towards the kitchen. She passed many of the crew on the way. The manor had effectively transformed from abandoned ruin to functioning base of operations. Pushing through the kitchen door, she expected to find Dre preparing the evening meal. Instead, she found Nolric slumped in the corner, half hidden in shadow. Fast asleep. She'd never seen him not handling 6 problems at once. She moved quietly to the water barrel. Nolric jerked upright with a gasp, eyes flying open. "Lena," he gasped. He blinked rapidly, eyes still caught somewhere between nightmare and reality. "Well," Pandra said into the heavy silence, "I guess Lena left quite an impression." Nolric's eyes snapped to her face. She watched him come fully awake in stages, awareness flooding back, then recognition. He cleared his throat, color rising to his cheeks. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Getting a drink," Pandra said. Nolric rubbed his face with both hands. "Good. I could use one too." Spontaneously, Pandra tossed the water in his face. Nolric blinked. "Did you just—" "You asked for a drink." Pandra fought to keep her expression innocent. "You just didn't specify how you wanted it." Nolric stared at her for another beat. "Fair enough," he grinned. Another week passed, and Calner was well enough to walk a few steps without falling over. Which was the moment Pandra decided to confront his alpha. "So when are you leaving my house?" she asked, entering a room she'd been told she'd find Nolric in. Then she froze because he was indeed there, indeed alone, but he was also shirtless. Nolric looked back. "Eager to be rid of me, my lady?" he asked, one hand stretching over his shoulder towards a large gash down his spine. His fingers couldn't quite reach. "Keep flapping your hand at it," Pandra said from the doorway. "That'll sort it right out." "If I didn't know any better," Nolric said, tilting his head, "I'd think you were enjoying spying on a naked man." "Well, thank the gods you know better then," Pandra said, while trying absurdly hard not to enjoy the view. She gestured for him to turn around. "Let me see." "It's nothing," Nolric grunted. "Then you won't mind me checking." Pandra touched his arm. Nolric went very still, like her hand had short-circuited his brain. The smile faded. His breathing deepened. "Turn around," Pandra said quietly. He did. The wound was worse than she'd expected, a slash from shoulder blade to mid-back. "What happened?" she asked. "The King's Guards happened," Nolric said, voice tight. "They burned down an entire village for helping us, set fire to everything, and watched it burn." Pandra's fingers stilled on his back. "Perhaps you shouldn't stand up to the king then," she suggested softly. Norik's head snapped around, eyes flashing gold. And let him terrorize his people, destroy villages, and burn children alive? All because he's a greedy, paranoid bastard who'll do anything to maintain his power? So you admit removing the king from the throne is your goal? She said, never hid it. Norik turned fully, searching her face. Isn't that why you fled court? Because of him? Pandra felt stunned. I didn't. It's obvious you're a noble, Norik said, rolling his eyes. You give orders like you expect people to follow them. And this ruin belongs to the crown. Only nobles get crown property. Pandra hesitated. I didn't flee, she said finally. I was exiled. Because of your baby? Norik asked. Pandra's hand flew to her belly. What do you mean? She snapped. Norik frowned. You're with child, I assumed. He searched her gaze. You didn't know, he realized. Pandra turned to leave. She needed to get away from this conversation and this beautiful, half-naked man. She made it 2 steps before Norik caught her wrist. Let go, Pandra said through clenched teeth. It's normal to be scared, Norik observed. You're here, pregnant, alone. I'm not alone, Pandra said sharply, finally meeting his eyes. There was a kindness in his expression that made her breath catch. You're right, you're not. Nolrik's gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth, lingered there. Pandra's breath stuttered in her chest. She could feel his thumb pressed against her pulse. He leaned in, head tilting, gaze fixed on her mouth, and Pandra's eyes started to close. Nolrik! Pandra jerked backward. Nolrik dropped her wrist. Aster stood in the doorway, glaring at them. Aster, Nolrik said, stepping away smoothly. What are you doing? Aster asked. Pandra refrained from rolling her eyes, barely. He needs a healer, she said. Nolrik sent her a betrayed look. I'm fine, he snapped. You're not, Pandra said flatly. I'll get Susan. She pushed past Aster, not trusting herself to look at either of them, with her heart still racing and her skin still warm where he'd touched her. With an outlaw, a man actively working to overthrow her husband. Perfect, she thought grimly as she stalked down the hallway. Just perfect. Pregnant, I knew it, Susan exclaimed. Shh, Pandra hissed, looking around the forest wildly. They'd fled deep into the woods specifically so Pandra could tell Susan without the entire crew overhearing. Susan grabbed her hands. But my lady, this means it's the king's, isn't it? Pandra nodded. After 5 years of failure, when she was farther from him than she'd ever been, she was finally carrying what he wanted. The irony was not lost on her. If it's a boy, he'll take you back. Susan squealed, her face bright with hope. No, the word exploded out of Pandra, loud enough to startle birds from nearby trees. He'd take her child away. He'd make him his son, his heir, mold him into a perfect copy of himself. I won't go back, Pandra said grimly. Susan's expression shifted. My lady, Nolrik says he'll help, Pandra interrupted. Nolrik is an enemy of the crown, Susan whispered. But not of the people, Pandra said. I think they want to do good, don't you? She'd watched them over the past 3 weeks, how they treated each other with genuine respect and affection. Nolrik made decisions not based on what benefited him, but on what kept his people safe. The polar opposite of the king. Susan hesitated. Just remember, sometimes good intentions lead to terrible consequences. Pandra didn't know what to make of that. Later, she sat in her room and pressed both hands to her still flat stomach. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she whispered to the maybe baby. No answer came. Chapter 6. The celebration took place a few weeks later. The crew was in high spirits after a successful supply run. Someone had produced several barrels of ale, and by the time the sun set, laughter echoed through the great hall. But after an hour of standing against the wall like furniture, Pandra slipped out. The hallway was cooler, quieter. She rounded a corner and bumped into Nolric. His strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Fancy meeting you here," he joked with that easy smile. Pandra's traitorous heart jumped. He looked good, shirt open at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. "Yes," Pandra said, "running into me in my own home." "What a coincidence." Nolric's smile faltered slightly. "Are you still so eager for us to leave?" "No," Pandra said quietly. "I'm not so eager for you to leave." Their eyes met, held. Nolric's hands were still on her shoulders. "Especially," Pandra added, "as you've been so dedicated to looking after me." "I told you I would, didn't I?" He said it matter-of-factly, another responsibility fulfilled. "Right," Pandra said. "Your responsibility. How could I forget? You don't need to." "This isn't even your baby," she snapped. "You don't owe me anything." "Then whose is it?" Nolric interrupted, his eyes suddenly intense. "It's mine," she said. He stepped closer. "And the father, where is he?" "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "Doesn't matter? How can it not matter? Do you even know who it is?" Pandra jerked back. Nolric's hands held her in place. "My husband," she snapped. "My husband is the father. Happy now?" Silence crashed over them. "You're married," Nolric said. "And what is it to you?" Pandra demanded. "You know what I wonder about?" Pandra stepped closer. "How you're so well versed in courtly matters. How you bow like you were trained for it since childhood. How you recognized this house belongs to the crown when it's been abandoned for years." She tilted her head. "Who are you exactly, Nolric? And what is it to you?" he said, throwing her own words back at her. "Forget it," she said, turning away. Nolric caught her arm. "If you lost him, if he's been captured, or you don't know where he is, I could help you find your husband. I have contacts, resources." Something broke in Pandra's chest. "That is very noble of you, sir," she said, voice shaking. "But I would rather die than see that man again." Nolric's expression changed. "Pandra," he said, voice softening. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He reached for her hand. She tried to pull away. He pulled her toward him instead. Pandra stumbled forward, hands landing on his chest for balance. Solid muscle under warm skin under soft fabric. She looked up, meaning to tell him to leave her alone. Then Nolric kissed her. It wasn't tentative. Pandra froze for half a heartbeat, then her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and felt Nolric smile against her mouth before deepening the kiss. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Where?" Pandra's heart was still racing. "Anywhere that's not here." Nolric glanced toward the party before someone interrupts. The forest was dark and cool, the sounds of celebration fading behind them. Nolric pulled her deeper into the trees, away from the house. Then he turned and kissed her again. Pandra went willingly into his arms. He lifted her slightly, not off her feet, but enough to press her back against a tree. His mouth moved over hers with increasing urgency. "Are you embarrassed?" Pandra asked when they broke for air. "About being seen with me?" Nolrik pulled back slightly to look at her. "A little bit," he admitted. The honesty stung. "Then maybe I should leave," Pandra said, starting to pull away. His arms tightened, holding her in place. "Absolutely not," he said, pinning her between his body and the tree. He kissed her neck just below her ear. "Wouldn't you be embarrassed?" Nolrik murmured against her skin. "If Susan found us like this?" Pandra snorted. "I suppose, though she'd be more embarrassed than I am." She broke off on a gasp as Nolrik's teeth scraped lightly over her pulse point. "Would you be embarrassed?" he asked. "If your husband found us?" Pandra cupped his face with both hands. "To be honest," she said firmly, "I don't consider him my husband anymore. I don't care what he thinks." Nolrik's entire body relaxed against hers. "So you can stop being jealous," Pandra added, smiling. "Jealous?" Nolrik pulled back, affronted. "I'm not." Pandra kissed him to shut him up. It was supposed to be brief, teasing, but Nolrik made a sound low in his throat and deepened it. He walked her backward until her back hit the tree again, his body covering hers. "Nolrik," she breathed against his mouth, hips canting toward his touch. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Dark, wanting, yes," Pandra whispered. Something in him gave way. He lifted her, wrapping her legs around his waist, supported her against the tree, and then there, no more thinking. It was nothing like her marriage bed. This was heat and connection, and Nolrik's voice rough in her ear, saying her name. Pandra clung to him, overwhelmed by sensation. When it was over, they stayed like that for long moments. Chapter 7. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments. Pandra would slip away to gather herbs in the forest. Nolrik would follow 5 minutes later and breathe her in like a drowning man finding air. "We shouldn't," Pandra would murmur against his mouth. Probably not. He'd agree already, kissing her. Life at the manor had settled into something almost comfortable. Pandra was becoming part of something, part of them. She was in the kitchen one afternoon helping Claudia prepare the evening meal when Aster walked in. The younger woman's expression was strange, triumphant and cold at once. She stopped in the doorway, eyes locking on Pandra. "Who are you really?" she demanded. Pandra frowned. "Excuse me?" Aster pulled something from her pocket, a piece of parchment that she thrust toward Pandra. "I found this in the village. Royal proclamation, complete with a portrait." Pandra's blood turned to ice. "Queen Pandra, third wife of His Majesty King Godric," Aster read aloud, "has been sent to her country estate for her health and rest. Any assistance rendered to Her Majesty will be rewarded by the crown." The room went quiet. "It's not what it looks like." Pandra attempted, hands shaking. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Within seconds, the kitchen filled with people. Dre, Kalnor, others drawn by raised voices, and the promise of conflict. "What's going on?" Kalnor asked. Aster handed him the parchment without a word. Pandra watched him read it. His jaw tightened. "Pandra," his voice came out flat. "Is this true?" "Yes," she said quietly. The room exploded. "You were married to the king?" Dre's voice rose above the others. "While we starved," someone else shouted from the back. "You could have helped us." This came from Kellner, and the quiet devastation in his voice hit harder than any shouted accusation. "All this time, you were the queen." Pondra's vision blurred. Her chest felt tight. "You don't understand." Her voice came out strangled. "I couldn't?" Aster asked. "Or wouldn't?" "I didn't have any real power," Pondra snapped. "I was there to give him an heir, that's all. Just living in luxury while people died." Aster stepped even closer. Pondra flinched. "My mother died because we couldn't afford medicine," Aster continued. "Medicine that was sitting in your palace stores." "I didn't know," Pandra tried. "You didn't look," Aster shouted, and the accusation echoed off the kitchen walls. The words hit like knives, all the sharper because Pondra knew them to be true. She hadn't looked. She'd been a badly treated wife, but she'd also been a queen, and she hadn't helped her people. "And now you come here, pregnant with his heir." Aster's voice broke slightly. "And what are we supposed to do? Feel sorry for you? Protect you?" Pondra saw understanding dawn across the faces around her. "The baby," Dre said slowly. "The king's baby. What's she planning? To go back to him? To sell us out for a place in his bed again?" Pondra felt like she was drowning. Quiet. The voice cracked through the room like a whip. "Nolric." Pondra's head snapped up. He stood in the doorway, travel-worn and dusty from the road. His expression was unreadable, carefully, deliberately blank. Their eyes met across the crowded kitchen, and Pondra felt her heart crack. Aster pushed past her, moving toward Nolric with desperate urgency. "You heard that, right?" Aster's voice was more pleading than angry now, looking up at Nolric like he was her last hope. "She's not one of us. She's a noble." She said the word with blatant distaste. "Not just a noble," Kelnor said, voice hard. "The queen." Susan finally moved from where she'd been frozen near the hearth. "Who still spent weeks tending to you, Kelnor? You ungrateful fool." Still, she lied. "And so did you." "You were holding us captive," Susan shot back. "What was she supposed to do?" "Susan," Pondra said quietly, looking at Nolric. His face was still impassive, still unreadable. It terrified her more than anger would have. She understood now. Finally understood what they were really angry about. They were disappointed, hurt, because she'd been their ruler and she'd never helped them. Aster turned back to Nolric, desperation clear in every line of her body. "What do we do with her?" Nolric's jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Nothing," he said. "We do nothing." "What?" Aster asked. "You're so compromised you can't see." "Enough, Aster," Nolric said, but there was no heat in it, just exhaustion. "No." Aster grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "I've watched you trail after her for weeks. She's got you eating out of the palm of her hand. Probably so she can sell you out to the king as soon as—" "That's not true," Pondra snapped, taking a step forward. "Shut it," Aster whirled it on her. "We need a leader who's focused on what matters, not on," she waved dismissively at Pondra, "whatever distraction the queen's skirts provide." Nolric flinched. The movement was small but visible. Aster turned back to him. Her voice softened. "You always do what's right, Nolric. You'll do what's right now." She squeezed his arm. "You'll do what's right for us, for the people who need you." Then she left and the others did too, and suddenly Pondra and Nolric were alone, staring at each other across the kitchen. He looked sad. so deeply, profoundly sad that Pandra wanted to cross the room and hold him. "I wouldn't sell you out to him," Pandra said finally. Nolric's shoulders sagged slightly. "I know. I hate him," Pandra continued. "I hate my husband." Nolric looked away, jaw tight. 5 years, Pandra said. "I was married to him for 5 years. I couldn't give him an heir, so he sent me here to humiliate me, to get rid of me." "Why didn't you tell me?" Nolric asked. "Because I was scared," Pandra said. "Because you're trying to overthrow my husband, and I thought you'd kill me or ransom me." Nolric's head snapped around at that. "You really think I'd hurt you?" he asked, wounded. "No," Pandra sighed. "I don't. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." "It doesn't matter anymore," Nolric said. Pandra reached for him. "Of course it matters. They don't trust you," Nolric said quietly. "Which means they don't trust me for keeping you here." For he swallowed. "For being with you." The shame in his voice hit Pandra like a slap. "You're allowed to have relationships," Pandra said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're allowed to want things." "Want things?" Nolric asked. "At a time like this? When no one in this entire kingdom is allowed to have anything." He turned away from her. "Aster's right. I can't afford to be distracted. Not now. We're leaving," he said. "Tomorrow, first light." Pandra stumbled backward, hand reaching for the wall. "Don't," she said, and her voice came out so small. "I have to, Pandra," Nolric said, and his voice shook. "I have to." She reached for him with both hands. "I'm asking you not to, because I don't," he said, turning away. "I love you," she exclaimed. The words tore out of Pandra before she could stop them. Nolric froze. He turned around slowly, and the look on his face made Pandra want to die. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. Pandra recoiled. "What are you talking about?" she asked, voice hardening. Nolric turned then. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I can't make the wrong choice again." Then he walked away, leaving Pandra's heart in pieces on the floor. Chapter 86. Weeks passed. Pandra's stomach grew. The baby made itself known with waves of nausea that hit at random. The bump was undeniable, a constant reminder of the future she had to face alone. At night, lying in bed, she'd remember the way he'd looked at her, the way his hands had felt against her skin. She'd wonder where he was, if he was safe, if he thought about her even half as much as she thought about him. Then, one freezing evening in early winter, when the first snow had started to fall, someone pounded on the door. Pandra's heart leaped into her throat. And there he was. Nolric stood on her doorstep, snow dusting his shoulders, that infuriating grin on his face, as if he had never left. "Fancy running into you here," he said. Pandra stared. He looked terrible. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and when their gazes met properly, when he saw her, the grin faltered. He deflated visibly. "Missed me?" he joked, but his voice came out rough. Pandra opened her mouth to say something cutting. Then she noticed the limp figure hanging between Nolric and Dre's shoulders. Aster. Her head lolled forward. "Oi!" Hair plastered to her face with sweat. "Poisoned. Inside," Susan said immediately, pushing past Pandra. "Quickly, bring her in." They carried Aster through the kitchen to the small room Pandra and Susan had been using. "The antidote," Susan was saying. "Do you have it?" "I do," Nolric said quietly. Where? Pandra snapped. Nulrik met her gaze. The world narrowed to just them, to those green eyes she'd dreamed about. Her heart skipped. It's right here, he said. Pandra blinked. What? Nulrik held her gaze for another beat, then he broke eye contact and strode out of the room without another word. A beat later, Pandra marched after him. Why would you leave something so precious here? She exploded at his back as he strode down the corridor and up the main stairs. Because I trust you, Nulrik said. He stopped on the mezzanine landing, ran his hands over the stone searching for something. He found a loose stone and prized it from the wall with his fingers. From the hole behind it, he drew out a small vial filled with dark, viscous liquid. You're unbelievable, Pandra said. I know, Nulrik said. He turned to face her. I know, and I'm sorry. But right now, I need you need, Pandra interrupted. It's always what you need, isn't it? She saw him flinch. Well then, take what you need, I guess, Pandra said, turning away abruptly. That's what you're good at. She made it 3 steps before he grabbed her arm and pulled her back. I hid it here because... He hesitated. Because one day I wanted an excuse to come back to see you. Pandra stared at him. At least you admit you need an excuse to see me, she snapped, pulling her arm free. Like I'm some sort of guilty pleasure or something. She disappeared into a side bedroom and slammed the door shut, pressed her back against it, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, and cried. By midnight, color had returned to Aster's cheeks. Her fever had broken. She slept peacefully. Pandra had returned to the sick room once she'd composed herself, eyes red but dry. In the small hours before dawn, Aster woke properly, weak but conscious. Water, she croaked. Pandra helped her drink as Nulrik appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. How is she? He asked, his voice rough from disuse. Better, Pandra said, looking away. Good. Nulrik stepped into the room properly. Thank you for helping, really. He swayed suddenly, catching himself against the doorframe with one hand. Pandra's head snapped up. Nulrik? I'm fine, he said, but his voice sounded strained. Just tired? He didn't look fine. He looked gray. Pandra stood. When did you last sleep? I'm fine, Nulrik repeated. He pushed off from the doorframe and took a step forward. His knees buckled. Pandra lunged across the room, catching him before he hit the floor. Nulrik, she went to her knees, struggling to support him. What's wrong with you? She demanded, fear sharp in her voice. His skin was burning. His eyes were unfocused. Nothing, he assured her, but the word came out slurred. Just need rest. Pandra looked down, scanning his body for injuries, and saw it. A flash of black at his collar. Her breath stopped, black veins spreading from his collarbone toward his heart. It's not as bad as it looks, Nulrik managed. When? Pandra demanded. When did this happen? He looked away. Same ambush as Aster, he admitted. Pandra grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to focus on her. You just decide your life matters less? I love you, Nulrik murmured. Pandra froze. I love you, he repeated. I should have said it before. I should have. Ooh. His eyes rolled back. Nulrik, Pandra screamed. Susan, Dre, someone help. They got him onto the bed beside Aster. It took all of them. Pandra, Susan, Dre, who'd come running at the screaming, and Kalnor, who'd appeared from whatever watch he'd been keeping outside. His fever is worse than Astor's was, Susan said quietly. How long does he have? Pandra asked. Kalner's expression darkened. Days, maybe less. He pretended he wasn't hit. Stupid bastard kept saying he was fine. There has to be more antidote, Pandra said desperately. That was the last of it, Dre said quietly. We used everything we had left, saving Astor. Then where do we get more? Pandra demanded, standing. The king's private stores at court, Kalnor said defeated. That's the only place. We used to have someone on the inside who could access them, but he was caught. We'd need weeks of reconnaissance to even attempt another infiltration, and we don't have weeks, Pandra interrupted. I'll go. I'll fetch the antidote from court. Kalner's eyes widened. My lady, I'm the queen, Pandra said firmly. I can walk through the front door. Who's pregnant with the king's heir? Susan said carefully. The moment he sees you, he'll never let you leave. On the bed, Nolric made a distressed sound. No, he gasped, and his hand shot out, searching blindly until it found Pandra's. His fever-bright eyes found hers. Lena, he gasped. Lena, don't go. He'll kill you. I couldn't stop him before, but I can. His eyes rolled back. His hand went slack in hers. Pandra stared at him, heart pounding in her ears. I'm going, she said throat tight, and I'm bringing back that antidote. I'll come with you. Astor sat up in bed, still pale but awake, alert. Her eyes were clear and sharp. The poison hadn't been in my system as long as Kalnor when he was treated, she said. I don't need to stay put. She looked at Pandra steadily. We'll get the antidote. A moment of silence fell over the room, everyone looking at each other. All right, Pandra said finally. Let's go steal from the king. And for the first time since they'd met, Astor smiled at her. Small and grim, but real. Chapter 9. The palace looked exactly the same as when she'd left. Same marble columns, perfectly manicured gardens. But Pandra was different now. And that made all the difference. Your Majesty! The guards at the gate straightened, shocked. Nobody informed us you were returning. His Majesty wanted it to be a surprise, Pandra said smoothly, letting them see her stomach. Their expressions shifted from confusion to excitement. I'll have someone fetch His Majesty immediately, one guard said, already turning. No need, Pandra said graciously. I'll surprise him myself. She swept past them before they could protest. Astor trailing behind, playing the role of concerned midwife to perfection. She found the king in his study, as expected. Shock rippled across his face at the sight of her. Pandra, his eyes dropped to her stomach, widened. She let her hand rest on her belly and smiled beatifically. I am. He moved around the desk toward her. Why didn't you send word? I would have sent an escort. I thought the news best delivered in person, she replied, after so many years of disappointment. This is the king actually smiled. Truly wonderful, Pandra. How far along? 4 months, Pandra said. I wanted to be sure before returning. The first few months are delicate, as you know. I thought it best to rest in the peace and quiet you so generously provided. She smiled, making it sound like the exile had been a gift. The king's chest puffed slightly. Of course, you must be moved to my chambers immediately, he said, already summoning the servants. Better security, better care. That would be lovely, Pandra said, though I do have my midwife with me. She's been invaluable. Of course, the king said, barely listening. Within the hour, Pandra's meager belongings were being moved to the king's wing of the palace, a part of the castle she'd never been allowed in during their marriage, but now she was a valuable commodity. The king's chambers were opulent, gold leaf on the ceiling, tapestries worth more than villages, and on the wall opposite the bed, a portrait. Pandra stopped dead when she saw it. A woman, young, beautiful, with dark hair, pale skin, familiar sharp cheekbones, and sharp green eyes. She looked exactly like Nolric. Admiring your predecessor? The king stood in the doorway, holding a goblet of wine. Who is that? Pandra asked carefully. Queen Adelina, the king said, moving into the room. He looked up at the portrait with something that might have been nostalgia. My first queen, Adelina, Lena. Pandra looked at her green eyes. Could she be related to Nolric? She died in childbirth, they say. She probed carefully. Ironic, the king replied. 3 years she failed to conceive, and when she finally did, the birth killed her and the child. He took a sip of wine. Weak constitution from poor blood. What about her family? Pandra asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. The king's expression darkened. Traitors, the lot of them. When Adelina died, they had the gall to accuse me of murder. He waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense, of course. They were so grief-stricken, they began plotting against the crown. It wasn't simply casual cruelty in his tone that made Pandra's stomach turn. 5 years in court, and she could read who was lying like a textbook. And she knew the king's tells more than most. Lena hadn't died in childbirth, and her family had been right. The king had murdered her, probably because he thought her incapable of bearing him an heir. What did you do? She asked. What I had to, the king said simply. Can't have traitors plotting rebellion, can we? Her twin brother was the worst of them, the Duke of Ashfolk. Pandra felt the room tilt. That's the past, the king said, moving towards her. You're the future now, you and my son. Pandra forced herself not to pull away. That night, Pandra lay in the enormous bed in the king's chambers, staring at Adelina's portrait in the moonlight. Nolric's sister, murdered by the king for failing to produce an heir. Just like Pandra would be if she didn't escape. She had to get the antidote, fast. According to Kalner, the king kept his private medical stores locked in a room near his study. The problem was getting the key off him. Pandra came up with a plan. She let 3 days pass to lull him into a false sense of security. On the 4th night, Pandra sat across from the king at dinner. I feel strange, she said quietly. She pressed a hand to her stomach. Nauseous, and my head. The king frowned. You were fine this morning. I know, Pandra said, but now I feel... She stood abruptly, swaying slightly. I feel she let her knees buckle. The king caught her before she hit the floor. Pandra, something's wrong. She let her breathing go shallow. The baby! Get the physician! The king roared at the servants. Now! He carried her to the bed, laying her down with fear in his eyes. My stomach, Pandra gasped, burning like poison. The king's face went white. Poison? Someone must have at dinner. Pandra let tears stream down her face. Please, save the baby. The king was already shouting orders. Bring the antidote from my private stores. He fumbled with the key at his belt, thrust it at a servant. In the study, the black vial. Go. The servant ran. The king paced beside the bed, running his hands through his hair. Pandra let herself shake, let herself look terrified. The servant returned with the vial. The king snatched it, uncorked it, tilted it to Pandra's lips himself. "Drink," he commanded, "all of it." Pandra let the bitter liquid fill her mouth. She swallowed some, enough that he'd smell it on her breath if he checked. The rest she held in her cheeks, careful not to let it show. "Better?" the king demanded. Pandra let her breathing slow. "Steady," nodded weakly. "Rest," the king said, standing. "I'll have guards posted outside." He left, taking the empty vial with him. The moment the door closed, Pandra took an empty vial from her gown and spat the antidote into it. Maybe half of the dose. She hoped it was enough. Then she waited. At midnight, Pandra slipped out of bed, moved silently to the servant's door. Aster waited on the other side, dressed in dark traveling clothes. Pandra handed her the vial. "It's not the full dose, but it should be enough." Aster took it carefully. "It'll have to be." She met Pandra's eyes. "We'll come back for you once he's well." Pandra smiled. "Go before someone sees you." Aster disappeared into the dark hallway. Chapter 10. 3 months passed. Pandra sat through council meetings now. The king wanted nobles to see the pregnant queen, proof of his virility and power. So she sat beside him and listened, and what she heard made her sick. Tax increases on villages already starving. Work camps expanding. Execution orders signed with casual indifference. At night, she lay in the king's bed and stared at Adelina's portrait. Nolric's sister. She hadn't heard from the rogues, hadn't heard if the antidote had worked, if Nolric had survived. The not knowing ate at her. It was late evening when it happened. Pandra was alone in the king's chambers, reading by candlelight. A gust of wind nearly blew the flame out. She looked up. The window was open. She was certain she'd closed it. "Pandra." The voice was quiet, familiar. A shadow slipped through the window with fluid grace. He wore dark clothes, face partially obscured, but she'd know those eyes anywhere. "Nolric," Pandra breathed. Her book fell from nerveless fingers. Nolric crossed the room in 3 strides, hands going to her elbows to steady her. And just like that, she was touching him again. "You're alive," Pandra said, and her voice shook with relief. "Thanks to you," Nolric said quietly. His eyes roamed over her face, drinking her in. "You saved my life. You risked everything. Walked back into the place that terrified you. All to save me." "You're alive," Pandra interrupted. And suddenly, she was crying. "That's all that matters." She wrapped her arms around him, buried her face in his shoulder, and sobbed. All the fear she'd been holding for 3 months poured out. Nolric's arms came around her carefully. "I'm here," he murmured against her hair. "I'm sorry. I thought you were dead," Pandra gasped between sobs. Nolric's eyes were suspiciously bright. "We have horses waiting in the courtyard," he said. "We leave tonight. I'll take you somewhere safe." "And when the baby comes?" "I can't," Pandra said. The words hurt to say, because she wanted to. She wanted to run away with him so badly it physically ached. But she couldn't. She'd spent 3 months in council meetings. 3 months watching the king destroy his own kingdom. 3 months realizing that she had power. "Pandra, he'll kill you," Nolric said. "After the baby is born, the moment he has his heir. "Is this what happened to your sister?" Pandra asked quietly. "Adelina," Nolric's face went pale. "How do you?" he started. Pandra pointed to the portrait on the wall. Nolric turned slowly. For a long moment, he just stared at his sister's face. "She couldn't conceive for 3 years," he said finally. "When she finally did, she was so happy, so relieved." His voice cracked. "She thought she was safe." Pandra's chest tightened. "But she lost the baby," Nolric continued. "Miscarried at 7 months. And the king," he stopped, swallowing hard. "He said she'd failed him, that she was useless." He took a shuddering breath. "She tried again, got pregnant again within 6 months, and lost that baby too." And then his hands clenched into fists. "Within a week, she was dead, poisoned, disguised as complications from the loss." Nolric turned to face her fully. "I was at court when it happened," he said, "living in my comfortable rooms, attending parties, laughing with nobles, eating 5-course meals while my sister—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I knew the king was difficult with her. I knew she was struggling. But I didn't look closely. I wasn't ready to give up my life, my comfort." His voice broke completely. "By the time I found out what happened, by the time I understood what he'd done, it was too late. He'd already branded my family traitors. He had them all killed." "Nolric, you can't blame yourself," Pandra said, cupping his face with both hands. "You were young, you didn't know." "I should have known," Nolric said. "I should have looked." Pandra's heart cracked. "That's why you want him gone?" she asked. Nolric nodded. "I want him gone so no other family ever experiences the loss mine has," he said. "No one is safe from him, Pendra. No one." Pendra understood now. Understood the guilt that drove him. "He can be replaced," she said quietly. She took Nolric's hand and placed his palm flat against her swollen belly. "Feel that?" she asked. The baby kicked, hard, right where Nolric's hand rested. His eyes went wide. "That's the heir," Pendra said. "Born of the queen, in lawful marriage to the king." She met his eyes. "And raised by us, taught to be kind, to care about their people." Understanding dawned across Nolric's face. "When this baby is born," Pendra continued, "we need the king gone and me in his place, as queen regent until the true heir is old enough to rule." Nolric stared at her for a long moment. Then he dropped to one knee again, hand still pressed to her belly. "What are you doing?" Pendra asked. "Pledging myself to you," Nolric said simply. "You have my word. We will make you queen in truth." Pendra's vision blurred with tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. Nolric stood. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay." "I don't feel brave," Pendra admitted. "I want to leave with you." "Then come with me," Nolric said. "We can find another way." "There is no other way." Pendra placed her hands over his. "If I leave, I'm just a rebel, a traitor, the king's runaway wife. But if I stay, if I have the baby here, if I establish myself as the legitimate queen—" She took a breath. "The nobles will accept the heir. They won't accept a violent overthrow with no clear succession." Nolric closed his eyes, jaw clenching. "When the time comes," Pandra said, "we give this kingdom the ruler it deserves." A smile tugged at Nolric's mouth despite everything. "I love you," he murmured, leaning in. A sound in the hallway, footsteps, voices. "I have to go," Nolric said. He moved to the window. quick and silent. "Hold on for 2 more months. Can you do that?" Pandra straightened, one hand on her belly. "Of course I can," she said. Nolric's smile was fierce and proud. "That's why you're the queen." Then he was gone, and Pandra stood alone, one hand on her belly, the other pressed to her mouth, where she could still feel his kiss. 2 months. She looked up at Adelina's portrait. "I'll finish what you started," Pandra promised quietly. The baby kicked hard against her palm. Pandra smiled. "Soon," she whispered to her child. Epilogue 6 months later. The manor looked completely different. Pandra stood in the courtyard, the same courtyard where she'd first arrived, disgraced and exiled, and marveled at the transformation. The crumbling walls had been repaired. Wounded soldiers were being tended in what used to be the Great Hall. Families found refuge in rooms that had once been ruins. The king had fallen 6 months ago. She was queen now, truly, regent until her son came of age. Her son, who was currently sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her. He would never know his biological father. He would know Nolric instead. As if summoned by her thoughts, Nolric emerged from the manor. He reached her side, immediately checking on the baby before looking at her with those sharp green eyes. "He'll see me as his father," he said, "won't he?" "He already does," Pandra said. "He stops crying the moment he hears your voice." "We should get married," Nolric said suddenly. Pandra blinked. "What?" "Married," Nolric repeated properly. She stepped close. "You want to get married?" She laughed. "Even though it took you forever to admit you wanted this?" Nolric smiled, that slow, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Is that a yes?" he asked, leaning down to kiss her. "Obviously," Pandra replied against his mouth. They stood there in the courtyard of the manor that had once been a prison and was now a home. The place where everything had changed, where an exiled queen had found her power, and a guilt-ridden duke had found his redemption, and where their kingdom had been reborn.